Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Grim Reader. Still getting over my cold, but it is slowly receding, trying to take it easy. And today I'm going to talk to you about my top 10 reads of the year. And it's always sort of daunting because there's so much one could say about these books, just in terms of how they were just so meaningful to me. But I won't be able to do them justice because my thoughts are sort of incoherent anyway, and it's sort of the way I relate to my books, my favorites of it. It's almost impressionistic. It's just love. It won't sort of be comprehensive. It won't be finished. But maybe talking about our favorites is a hard thing to do anyway. Let's get on with it though. Coming in at number 10 is my third read in the Zola series about his family that he's writing about, the Rogan-Macquart series. This is The Kill, and it focuses on a brother of the other guy, Rogan, who for some reason changes his name to Sakar. And he's a fascinating character because he's another one of these negative characters who are fascinating. Like you want to find out about them even though they're awful. I don't know how he does it. It's almost like you are a little bit rooting for them. It's so different from reading someone like Trollope, where you just don't like the bad people. But with he's just more of a realist, and so you kind of take in the whole. There's a moral ambiguity that you just go with in these realist novels. And so I'm looking at my list. So I'm reading it in a different order from publication because I'm going by the narrative, like the timeline in the books themselves. And so it's a little bit different. And it is a fascinating website, and there's a whole bunch of things on here. It's got commentaries and indexes, and has a lot about the translations. So this is the newer guy who's translating most of these, Brian Nelson, who I think is he's Australian himself, or at least he taught at Monash, which is in Victoria, as I recall. I was just starting to read about him. This is fantastic. I love Zola. There's some things to be said, like I'm reading the next one now called Money, and the anti-Semitic stuff which was in Society, and I mean in his most famous article he comes out on the right side of it and j'accuse, but there's still a lot of it both in him and Trollope. It's just very much a part of the 19th century vibe, which makes me think of Daniel Deronda. So along comes Eliot and writes a sort of not anti-Semitic novel, yay her. But still, I just love Zola. I love his style. It's wacky, it's crazy, it's sort of realist, but because he's describing the mob, the masses, it can sort of veer off into almost surreal moments, because that's real. That's the real. The real is the surreal. And I loved it so much. So, and it was published 1871, 1872. And so, yeah, I'm moving on in my Zola stuff, but he's amazing. I know some of you out there are interested in Zola. It does make me, I always come back to Balzac and how I haven't really been able to connect to Balzac yet, but I want to. There's a part of me that does kind of want to, what are your favorite Balzac novels? Throw them at me. And I've read one and I didn't really care for it, but yeah, I think Balzac is different. I don't think he's quite as much of a realist as Zola. And so maybe that's what's going on. So that's number 10. Number 9, and these are sort of in order. I mean, it's very narrow distinctions, but they're sort of in order. Number 9 is the only book I don't have, and actually this is one I only listen to. I don't even have a copy of it, and I really need to get a hard copy of it. And it is Arnold Bennett, the great British author who's sort of fallen out of favor. He's considered stodgy. I mean, he's another dead white guy. Yeah, I know. I have an attachment to them, in case you haven't noticed. But his book, The Old Wives' Tale, was a fantastic listen. And it's sort of high realism also. So I have obviously these literary interests in Victorian stuff, and then moving on into realism. But it was an excellent book. It's very sort of, what I liked is the precise description of everyday things. I kind of am down for that. The description of the store and the people and how they interact. It's slow moving, and yet it's a book about two sisters that takes place between 1840 and 1905. And it's realist in the sense that you do get a sense of this place in England, these towns that sort of mid-England towns, and they're connected to where he actually grew up. They're connected to pottery and making pottery. in this one store. And then what you get with Old Wives' Tale is that one of the sisters moves to Paris and has an interesting time there and kind of comes into her own. And not entirely, she's a sad person. There's a sadness to her plight, as I recall, but she's also sort of very bootstrappy and keeps going. She keeps going and she makes the best of things, and she kind of is successful, as I recall. This has all been a while, but I do want to get a copy of it. I know that the little bit that I read is that the modernists looked down on him. I think he was very establishment, and so people like Woolf, whatever, were anti-establishment or considered themselves, even though part of them is completely establishment, so snobby. But that's the Bloomsbury part of it all. But he's not Bloomsbury. He was successful. He has an omelet named after him. He was really well thought of, and people read his stuff, and I could see why. I mean, I really want to read more of them. Highly recommend Bennett. Let's bring him back. Let's read him. Let's critique him if need be. I'm surprised there doesn't seem to be any new Oxford versions of his stuff. It's all old or even out of print, which is indicative of him having fallen out of favor in a way that a lot of the other people haven't. So yeah, I'm here for the Bennett relaunch. And that was published when did he publish it? 1908. So yeah, early 20th century. Moving on to my 8th book, which is probably one of the weirdest books that I have ever read, and it's the weirdest one in a certain sense in my collection, but I dearly loved it, and I'm still thinking about it a lot, and that's Gerald Murnane, the strange but fantastic Australian writer, who, as he says, so this is autofiction. It is an autobiography, but it's such a strange one, called Border Districts. And with Border Districts, he's referring to, so what's one thing that I remember that he does is he's extremely connected to his sort of, for lack of a better term, slightly boring deserty landscape where he lives in these villages around in Victoria, so the southern, below New South Wales, Australia. And he talks about borders there, but he's also kind of connecting to the borders of his own mind. This is a book that is it's about his mind and what's going on in his mind, and that's all he's really interested in. And so, but it's a really hard book to summarize. One of the themes is, so it says here, 2 months ago when I first arrived in this township, just short of the border, I resolved to guard my eyes. So the whole concept of guarding your eyes is such a strange one, like being careful about what you take in visually. And why do we need to guard our eyes? I think I'm having an oral moment where I'm thinking about listening a lot, and I do think there is such a thing as noise pollution. He's definitely kind of using the visual as one of the themes of the book. Colors and glass, painted glass, colored glass is a theme. My eye was then led on its usual route from the rectangular zone of light towards the source of light outside the boundaries of the illustration, then back towards the highlighted features of the young woman staring ahead of her. So he's remembering looking at a picture. There's memories of looking at things. And that I mean, it's just all, I wrote here, mind gazing and memory gazing. He's gazing at his own memories. Yes, Murnane comes in at number 8. There's sort of themes that run through it to do with the interaction of the mind as landscape metaphor. So his mind as a country, as a landscape, and how the fact that he's very untraveled, and so for him, everything exists in the imaginary. So countries exist in the imaginary, and that's all they are for him. They're things he contemplates, and he does seem to have an obsession with maps, internal maps. He creates sort of mind maps, so to speak, and an almost childlike obsession with things like colors and glass, and like this. He collects marbles, and at some point he talks about getting a box of pencils and just sort of observing the colors, which I kind of do respond to. It's silly, even the marbles makes me think back to my time in Australia. I also love marbles, and he's kind of playing with them in a fictional way, connecting them to eyeballs and things like that. It's just a really fascinating work of a writer who's very, very internally focused. So everything is about his brain, but it still kind of has enough connecting points that you can relate to it from your own perspective, or I could at least. So very, very interesting work. It has a very droll style, very kind of low affect, but still sort of funny almost. So that's coming in at 8. Another very strange book, you know, in competition for weird, but in a very different way, is Chouette by Claire Oshetsky, a wonderful, strange book about a lady who, one thing I think you need to do is not immediately see it as a metaphor. She actually does, an owl lady does come and make love to her, and she therefore gives birth to an actual owl. And but it is a sort of moving metaphor. Is the owl baby? I think it's always an actual owl baby, but sometimes perhaps it's able to hide its essence enough so that people around it don't. But they all react very strangely to it, including her husband. And so the whole novel is about how do you deal with an offspring that is basically wild. And so there's a lovely sort of description of how the house, she has her mothering instincts, and so as I recall, the house kind of degenerates, if that's what you want to call it, into a healthy place for a young owl to live. So it's full of vermin and sticks and branches and grass. It's just a wild place. It's not a house anymore. And then you get the other side, the society coming in sort of the main representative is the awful husband, who's very sort of normcore in an annoying way, and then his family. And he says things like, you know, you have to face facts. You have to, our offspring cannot be a wild animal, I'm just reading here the one quote, "Don't these tantrums worry you? Our girl can't keep acting like a wild animal her whole life." And the mother has conflicting thoughts about that, because she sort of resents the fact that, as it says here, your father wants to fix you and I want us to love you as you are. And so it gets into to be a deliberation on a society that is kind of, when our child rearing is about acculturating to a system that's not always healthy, especially these days. And, you know, civilizing your offspring is what is at stake here. And the father comes in, another quote, "It's time for our girl to be properly socialized." And then the mother comes in saying, "You're a perfectly socialized owl baby as far as I'm concerned." So it's as if she's perfect as she is, but she's not human. So, and to be human means to be someone that sort of goes along with all the constraints of being human. You cannot kill vermin, you cannot be violent, you can't be an owl baby. It's not going to work. Or, you know, can it work? And of course there is this overarching idea that the owl baby is a metaphor for any kind of, you know, offspring that doesn't fit into the constraints of our world for whatever reason. So there's something kind of autobiographical in a certain distanced way going on here too. The prose is amazing, and the shifting around of perspectives, it pulls you in. It's really well done. It's experimental. On the one page there'll be shifts from the baby changes and the mother changes, and that's, I think, kind of also can be reflective of a certain type of reality. And I really liked it. I really liked this book. I thought it was interesting. And her daughter's great too. Got a really interesting channel where makes interesting music. Yeah, animal consciousness. I have some doubts here, some little notes here. Parts of how the husband reacts to her is reminding me of Rosemary's Baby, in the sense that she knows the truth about her child, but everyone else is going to try and like gaslight her. I wrote here regarding the owl baby human moving target, makes the work constructedness become more apparent, postmodern in that sense. Back and forth, the mother, owl, human, both are neither simply mother. So mother is, to be a mother means also to not necessarily be human, and it kind of trumps being a human mother. So yeah, what does it mean to be a mother? The perils of motherhood. Really, really interesting work. Anyway, a lovely work, and I'm really glad I got to read it, coming in at number 7. Another book which was amazing and very layered, nonfiction, and I mainly listened to it, is Rebecca Solnit's work about Orwell's Roses. It goes all over the place in terms of plants and this climate stuff, and then of course Orwell's own life. It's like a biography, but in a really interesting roundabout way. We find out a lot about Orwell and his love for England and his political commitments and his anti-authoritarian stuff, his own sort of complicity in certain structures that he kind of grew out of, and that he's honest about how he feels about that, critique of Stalin, involvement in the war, and then all this plant stuff, the roses, and also his love of England. I mean, it's just a wonderful collection of essays, and once you get used to her voice, it's sublime. This is a really, really good, and if you like Orwell, even if you don't like Orwell, I think you will come to appreciate him. I already did. This also connects a little bit to my mother, who was a big Orwell proponent of Orwell. She loved him. And so, yeah, this was a great read, a great listen, a great read. That was number 6. 2021. Border District is 2017. Oh, True Ed is also 2021. So pretty modern for me, for the likes of me. Coming in at number 5, a great read. I love Knausgaard. I love Morningstar. It's got weird animal stuff. His prose is sublime. I love his I love his storytelling. It's sort of dystopian. The star appears, and then all these weird animal things occur. I can't wait to pick up. I actually have it on Kindle, but I don't really like reading on my Kindle that much. Going around from the different people, I just really enjoyed it. And yes, I am a fan of the Knausgaard. So Morningstar coming in at number 5. I think some of you have read it. It's great. It's great. I love it. I loved it. The next one is another one I really want to do more work on for you, make some more dedicated videos, because it's sort of like a project, yet another project, and that is Dorothy Richardson, the early forgotten modernist. I decided to just count the whole 3 as one book. There's 3 shorter novels in here, and all my Goodreads I counted them separately because I need book numbers. But 3 books are Pointed Roofs. It's a very long. As you can tell, I'm sort of down for sort of auto-fictional stuff, and this is auto-fiction at its most sort of stream of consciousness-y and female-centric. From basically, she wrote it between 1916 and 1917, so, you know, kind of so different from someone like Bennett, although in the introduction she actually mentions Bennett as a sort of the height of realism. And I think one of her projects, it's very obvious that she wants to sort of do a feminist, female-centric version of stream of how they experience the world, and she really does a wonderful job. It's sort of, in a way, it isn't unlike Murnane. Like, there's these passages where she's just focusing on how the light kind of comes through the window, but I've already talked about this, how what is so beautiful about it is how she, in these moments of silent and usually solitary observations or of things, she hones in on her own freedom and her own authority and her own voice. She's honing in on what does it mean to exist in a happy way, sort of in a way also kind of disconnected from society while still being in it. And she doesn't seem overly concerned about her future, which I kind of liked. You can sort of tell she's evolving into someone who doesn't want to really live a traditional life, but it's sort of not the focus. For her, the focus is just sort of, she's pushed into these situations where she has to go to Germany in the first one to be sort of quasi a teacher for money. She's working for money because her background is middle class but impoverished, and she uses these trips to work for these people as ways to she's still very much focused on her own development, but she does it in teaching or while interacting with the students and seeing how they like her or don't like her and observing other people. And Backwater was a little depressing because it is a backwater, and it's still very interesting and very well done. And Honeycomb, she comes to a group of people who are a little bit more, they're sort of well off but kooky, and so she's in this place where she's well treated, better treated than any other one. But she's also sort of a little bit older here, and yeah, I really enjoyed it so much, and I'm looking forward to reading the next section. So it's 4 books of 3 novels, so it's 12 short novels, all about her own life, her dwelling on her own experiences. And I will come back one day and do a bit more of a talk about her. She was sort of quite well educated in modern psychology. She was buddies with H.G. Wells, who encouraged her to write. It's always interesting to me why people get overlooked or become neglected, maybe just because there's so many out there. But this is really, really good. It's not worthy. It's good stuff. It's not second rate at all. It's just different from someone like Woolf. Yeah, she's definitely kind of doing her own thing. Absolutely loved it. Coming in at number 4. Top 3. Getting down to the top 3. Number 3 is one that I actually did mainly listen to, my thoughts are very kind of, it was an early in the year read, but I still think Dr. Zhivago was amazing and moving, and I loved it. It's immersive. It may be sad for Russia. So basically what it is, it's kind of the disintegration of society because of the revolution and these people's fates during the revolution, focusing on Dr. Zhivago, but also a bunch of other people. The Bolsheviks, the White Army. There's this amazing train scene where they're on the train for a long time. But it basically also does involve the kind of de-evolution. Like their kind of society's all more or less in place, but then very quickly also. So the whole novel is, at the end, they're living in this little, they're going to get, they're running away from one side or the other side, him and his lady, I guess. And they're in this they're basically in exile somewhere, so they're trying not to get caught by the wrong side. And it's nice when you find a nice bookmark in your book and you can take it out and use it. And I loved it so much. I did love Dr. Zhivago. To be honest, my colleague assures me that the poetry written by Pasternak at the end is the most important thing about the work, but to me, the novel itself was more immersive, and because it's hard to. It's translated poetry, translated by. I read the version Pavia Volokonsky. I think this is a newer one, and Pasternak. Of course, there's a whole story about how it first came out in Italy. It was sort of work done in exile, and he had a sort of interesting relationship, I think, himself to Stalin. He lived in virtual exile in an artist community until his death in 1960, so it really was the end of his life. He was awarded the Nobel Prize, but wasn't able to go pick it up. And it's a great work of literature that I would highly recommend. And if you want to get through it more quickly than I could by reading it, listen to it and read along a little bit for all the names. You're always making lists of names with the Russians, so I am. Number 2 is my number 2 for a number of reasons. It's another Russian work, The Master Margarita. I loved it so much, and it kind of made me less sad for Russia because it's kind of so funny and irreverent, and it's written in 1967, so 10 years after. He's the one who had a more kind of okay relationship with Stalin, more than Pasternak. I'm getting him confused. But nevertheless, so you have this sort of sad, or nostalgic depiction of Russia in Dr. Zhivago, and then you have the irreverent, sarcastic, funny, hilarious depiction of Russian sort of Soviet society in Master and Margarita. And I will say another reason why it's in my number 2 is because of the fantastic buddy read. Best buddy reader is Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. It just is a whole experience to have read it with her, and I love it. I'm always a little bit wary of buddy reads because of my time commitments and just things, but with her it was an absolute delight. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for suggesting that we read it together. I think if I just don't do too many of them now and then, they can be really special. They're a great innovation of the BookTube. And Master Margarita. I think you should all read it. There's all kinds of it's an intertwining of it's sort of intertwined narrative. There's a biblical thing going on, of course. There's the Faust stuff going on, and then there's in a way the interplay of the different themes is fantastic. And it's so wacky. It's an extremely surreal novel, and really well translated by Mira Ginsburg. Mira Ginsburg is the translator. I am in awe of anyone who could translate fiction. I am in total awe of them as someone who just teaches the language at a very low level, German. So, technically I could translate to do it at this level of literature is jaw-droppingly difficult in my opinion. And so my hat's off to all of you translators out there. You do not get enough praise, and I am glad you do it, because that means we can participate in these great works. That was my number 2. Guess what my number 1 is? If someone had said to me, your number 1 is going to be a novel that was written in 1747 and is this big, I would have called you crazy. But no, it's true. My number 1 book for 2023 was Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. And the origin story of how I come to read this is also kind of ridiculous, but fitting. A cutie patootie on TikTok, Henry, what's his name? He started us on this. I forget his last name. He's someone who publishes a lot, but I think he dropped off because he got a job. Like teaching. Henry Elton? I don't know who his name is. Anyway, he started doing it on TikTok. Like, let's read the letters. Let's read it together. And he got a bunch of those ladies together to do it. And then he stopped. But see, the only reason I was able to finish such a chunker and be immersed with it to the point of not being able to put it down is I listened to it mainly. And it was a joint, different characters reading the different, and it really works well as a long play. And just the disintegration, the toxic manipulation of this poor young woman through her family and the guy, Lovelace. He is so evil and toxic, but fascinating. The second part is kind of all him, and it's a bit like, oh, you know, but you kind of get used to the fact that, yeah, that's what Richardson is doing here. He's giving you very, very minute descriptions of how brains and minds work and manipulate, and nothing is spared. Everything is spelled out and in excruciating detail. The emotional ramifications of her not wanting to marry this person, of being weirded in a weird situation, put with him, even though she didn't really want to be with him. It's just all very crazy. And, you know, the upshot of her plight, which, you know, if you know, you know, but I won't tell you, is almost like peaceful. You kind of are okay with what happens because there's no out for this poor person. It's just an amazing work. And as it says on the back, richly complex study of a fatally attracted couple, but they're not really attracted. She's never attracted to him. At the beginning, maybe a tiny bit. It's epistolary. It's a bunch of letters. That's why it kind of worked in the beginning on TikTok, because you just kind of go with the dates. And it's true, I started to read it. I did go along with the dates. I started reading it on whenever the first letter is. January 10th. Ooh, we're just coming up to the anniversary. So if you want to give yourself a treat, go get it on the audio and listen to the whole thing. And I quickly got into, I was sort of trying to keep up with the TikTok, but then I kind of kept going and didn't even pay attention to him anymore, because at some point he stopped updating us on his impressions. He even did this weird thing on the TikTok where he cut up his book. It's kind of funny, but it's amazing. I think it's worthy of my number 1. It's unique, and I had such a great time listening to it. Even it brings you to tears, just because the way she's so mistreated and the way she sort of can retain her dignity despite or sense of self-worth. And one thing that comes through is her complete isolation from everyone. She has one friend, one good friend. That's all she has, who stays by her. And at the end, she gets a few other people who finally really realize how she's been put upon by everyone. But without her friends, she was completely, her whole family abandoned her. And she's, a young woman in the 18th century, sort of upper middle class, but sort of respectable. It's about respectability. And she gets kind of thrown in with all these people who don't respect her, and Lovelace, who basically wants to, her, and does, apparently, her. And, it's amazing. And that's all I have to say. My number 1 read of the year. And an eclectic bunch of books. I'm sure you're used to that with me. And I'm looking forward to next year. I just think it was a great year, even though it wasn't really that many. For me, being able to listen to books is really helping me kind of get through them in a way that's where I still appreciate them. And it leaves me time to read other things. So I can read a book. And that's fine. I'm very wary of creating TBRs. I mean, I have a bunch of things I want to get to, Mozilla. I'm actually reading the next Zola now. and of course pilgrimage. So there are some sort of things. There's also 3 books on my shelves that have been that I haven't finished, and one of them has been on there for years. The second one, it's over a year now too. And I don't really mind. These are 3 unique works, which I won't tell you what they are, and I'm just going to leave them there. I will come back at some point with another update. I'll probably just do the weekly reading and etc. updates. Thank you all for watching. I was a little sad about the lack of comments on my first video, but I understand it. There's a lot going on and people liked it anyway. It's okay. We just do this for ourselves. Yeah, everything will be fine. I'll talk to you soon. Have you read these books? Do you like these books? Leave an emoji.